Before start this video, please subscribe my channel and click on bell icon. Thanks.
With the popularity of TV shows like Criminal Minds, profiling has become a fascination for many people. While the techniques portrayed in these shows may not always reflect the reality of profiling, investigators use real-life methods to catch criminals. Criminal profiling has become an integral tool for law enforcement in solving the most complex crimes. The profiling process involves analyzing data and information from crime scenes, victims, and witnesses to create a profile of the likely offender. This profile helps investigators identify potential suspects and narrow their search, ultimately leading to the arrest and conviction of the perpetrator. Let's explore 10 common profiling techniques law enforcement uses to solve crimes. Related, 10 bizarre things criminals did to evade the police. 10 Investigative Psychology. What is the difference between Investigative Forensic Psychology? Investigative psychology focuses on applying psychological theories and principles to investigating criminal behavior. This field seeks to understand how criminals think, behave, and operate to develop effective investigative strategies and techniques. Investigative psychologists analyze crime scene evidence, interview witnesses and suspects, and provide psychological profiles of offenders to aid law enforcement agencies in their investigations. By gaining insight into criminals' motivations, thought processes, and behavior, investigative psychologists can provide law enforcement agencies with the information they need to more effectively identify, apprehend, and prosecute. The Boston Strangler case involved the murder of 13 women in the Boston area in the 1960s. In this case, investigative psychologists analyzed crime scene evidence and conducted interviews with witnesses and suspects to develop a psychological profile of the criminal. The profile indicated that the killer was likely a sexually motivated individual with a history of violence against women. This information helped investigators focus on identifying suspects who fit this profile. Ultimately, a suspect named Albert DeSalvo was arrested and confessed to the murders. 9. Geographical profiling. Forensic factor. What is geographic profiling? Geographic profiling is a technique used in criminal investigations to identify the likely area where an offender is based on the locations of their crimes. This technique is based on the idea that criminals are more likely to operate in areas they are familiar with and that the location of their crimes can provide valuable insight into their behavior and movements. Law enforcement loves geographic profiling as a way to analyze the locations of their crimes and identify patterns and similarities between them. This information can then be used to narrow the search for the culprit to a specific geographic area, which can increase the efficiency of the investigation and potentially lead to their capture. Geographic profiling was specifically helpful when catching the Yorkshire Ripper, a serial killer who operated in the north of England in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Investigators used geographic profiling to analyze the locations of his attacks and narrow down the possible area where he was based. This led to the eventual capture and conviction of Peter Sutcliffe, who was identified as the Yorkshire Ripper. 8. Offender profiling psychology shortcuts. Offender profiling, also known as criminal profiling, is a technique investigators use to develop a psychological profile of a criminal offender. This technique involves analyzing their behavior, motivations, and personality traits to create a profile of the type of person who is likely to have committed the crime. This technique is typically used in cases where there is little or no physical evidence available, such as in cases of serial murder or rape. The profile created through this technique can help investigators narrow their list of suspects and focus their investigation on those who match the profile. Offender profiling was crucial in the case of the BTK, bind, torture, kill, killer, who murdered 10 people in Kansas between 1974 and 1991. Investigators used offender profiling to develop a profile of the person likely to have committed the crimes. This profile was based on analyzing the killer's behavior, including his use of restraints and killing patterns. The profile helped investigators to narrow down their list of suspects and ultimately led to the arrest and conviction of Dennis Rader, who matched the profile created by investigators. 7. Forensic linguistic profiling. Forensic linguistic profiling. What your language reveals about you. Harry Bradford TEDx Stoke. Forensic linguistic profiling is a technique used in criminal investigations to analyze written or spoken language to develop a profile of the author or speaker. This technique is based on the idea that language can provide valuable clues about the author's or speaker's personality, background, and cultural influences. Forensic linguistic profiling helps investigators to build a profile by analyzing the language used in their communications, such as letters, emails, social media posts, or recorded messages. By analyzing the language, investigators can identify patterns, such as speech or writing style, specific vocabulary, and syntax, that can provide insights into the author's or speaker's characteristics. In the case of the Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, forensic linguistic profiling made all the difference. Investigators used this technique to analyze the language in the Unabomber's manifesto sent to the media. The language analysis helped investigators develop a profile of the author that included characteristics such as a high level of education, a desire for attention, and a belief in the superiority of his ideas. This profile helped them identify and arrest Kaczynski. 6. Statistical profiling and Milgram. Why smart statistics are the key to fighting crime. Statistical profiling is a technique used in criminal investigations that involves analyzing data and statistical information to develop a profile of the likely offender. This technique is based on the idea that certain demographic or socioeconomic factors may be associated with criminal behavior and that these factors can be used to identify potential suspects. Statistical profiling helps investigators build an offender profile by analyzing crime statistics, demographics, and socioeconomic factors. This information can then be used to narrow down the list of potential suspects and focus the investigation on those who fit the profile. One example of statistical profiling was in the case of the Green River Killer, a serial killer who murdered at least 49 women in the Seattle area in the 1980s and 1990s. Investigators used statistical profiling to analyze data such as the victims' demographics, lifestyles, and locations of their bodies. The analysis revealed that the killer was likely to be a white male in his 30s or 40s, with a history of arrests for prostitution and a connection to the trucking industry. The killer, Gary Ridgway, matched the profile created by investigators. 5. Victimology. Victimology helps investigators to build a profile of the victim by analyzing factors such as their age, gender, and socioeconomic background. This information can then be used to identify potential suspects and motives for the crime. You can examine the use of victimology in the case of the Golden State Killer, who committed a series of rapes and murders in California in the 1970s and 1980s. Investigators used victimology to analyze the characteristics of the victims and identify patterns that could help to identify the offender. The analysis revealed that the killer preferred attacking couples in middle-class neighborhoods and that his behavior suggested anger and aggression toward women. This profile helped investigators narrow their list of suspects and led to the arrest and conviction of Joseph James DeAngelo. For signature analysis 2. 5MO versus signature in crime profiling. Evil Academy signature analysis is a technique used in criminal investigations to analyze the unique characteristics of a crime scene or criminal behavior that suggest a particular criminal's distinctive modus operandi, MO. A criminal signature refers to the specific and distinct behavior or aspects of the crime scene that they deliberately incorporate into their crimes as a form of gratification, personal satisfaction, or personal expression. Law enforcement professionals can build their criminal profile by analyzing the crime scene and identifying recurring patterns or elements in the behavior that indicate a particular offender's involvement. This information can then be used to narrow down the list of potential suspects and focus the investigation on those who fit the profile. This technique has been gaining popularity. It was extremely important in the Zodiac Killer case, which involved the murders of several people in California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. Investigators used signature analysis to analyze the crime scene's distinctive characteristics, including using cryptograms, taunting letters to the press and law enforcement, and the killing's execution. The analysis revealed that the killer was motivated by a desire for attention and the opportunity to taunt law enforcement. They were able to identify the killer's profile, although the case remains unsolved. 3. Behavioral analysis. Criminal behavior analysis of Joker behavioral analysis is a technique used in criminal investigations to analyze the behavior of offenders to develop a profile of their personality, motivations, and likely actions. This technique is based on the idea that behavior is often consistent across different situations and can provide valuable insights into a fugitive's characteristics. Investigators can build a profile of the offender by analyzing factors such as their criminal history, social interactions, and the patterns of their behavior. This information can then be used to narrow down the list of potential suspects and focus the investigation on those who fit the profile. We saw the successful use of behavioral analysis in the case of the D.C. sniper attacks in 2002. Investigators used behavioral analysis to analyze the killer's behavior and identify patterns, such as their choice of targets, methods of attack, and communication with law enforcement. The analysis helped investigators develop a profile of the killer as a male in his 20s or 30s with a history of violence and resentment towards society. This profile ultimately led to the arrest and conviction of John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo. Digital forensic profiling. Inside the FBI's Digital Forensics Laboratory, digital forensic profiling is used in criminal investigations to analyze digital devices and data to develop a suspect's digital behavior profile. This technique is based on the idea that digital devices can provide valuable information about a suspect's activities and online behavior. This technique helps investigators build an offender profile by analyzing digital evidence, such as emails, social media activity, and internet search history. This information can then be used to identify potential suspects and motives for the crime. Digital forensic profiling was an important part of the Boston Marathon bombing case in 2013. Thanks for watching. Credits to listverse.com. Please subscribe my channel for more videos.